What's up guys, Sean here, and today we're doing part 2 of Joe Rogan ruining Adam Ruins Everything. But before we get started, I want to give a special thank you to everybody who moved over to my second channel, Dude Monkey HQ. It took me a really long time to get 1,000 subscribers on this channel that you're watching right here, so I appreciate it so much that so many of you jumped over there and gave me that boost to start out on my media channel. Going forward, my non-political media stuff will be over on that channel. I will continue the Game of Thrones Season 8 review series on that channel, so if you're interested in that, go over there and subscribe, and I will be uploading that probably the same day that this video comes out. Now that we got all the housekeeping stuff out of the way, let's get into the actual topic. In our last video, we covered the first half of this segment of Joe Rogan's interview of Adam Ruins Everything.
We're really going to go through like a cultural change on how we think about that. You know, it's morphing so quickly. Sports with trans athletes who are, competing with with their gender, right? That is a sporting world that I'm more interested in, right? And I think we should find a way to make that happen.
Now, in my last video, I pointed out that Adam was clearly taking the politically correct position, even though he knew it wasn't factually correct or based on the evidence. And that's why Joe Rogan was so easily able to pick his position apart with basic follow-up questions. However, the part that I left out was my position on trans athletes competing against their gender. Now, although I have mentioned this in a previous video, that was a really long time ago, so I decided to reiterate that position now so you know what my position is, because I think the solution is so simple, it's kind of absurd that it's not already implemented. And that solution is, men's sports should be anybody who can actually qualify sports. Now, the reason for this is pretty obvious. Men's sports are generally more competitive than female sports. They have the better athletes, and there's no real reason to protect men from somebody transitioning from a woman to a man because that's not uniquely unfair. Also, I've always been of the belief that if a woman can compete with the men, whether she's transgender or just a normal woman, then she should be allowed to compete with the men. Because if a woman can throw 95 and get outs on the major league level, the Mets need the bullpen help. Now, on the flip side, I would limit female sports to only biological females. The only reason that female sports brackets exist is because generally women cannot compete on the same field with men, especially if it's a physical sport. As pointed out in my last video, the science is in, biology hasn't changed, the facts have been in for a long time, and it's not fair to force women to compete against people who were born men. Female sports should only be for biological women who have not transitioned. That's what they're designed for. That's what they've always been designed for. And allowing male to female transgenders completely undermines their purpose and function.
One thing is, you're postulating a particular person who decided to transition at the age of 30, right? Mm-hmm. And they were very big and strong before, right? And they decided to transition. That being trans is just a way that people are, right? They're just people who are trans, and this is something that we're going to accept and support, right? You're seeing folks transition much earlier age,
and
so if someone is transitioning from the age of 7 years old, right, working with those hormones, from that age, right, they're not going to have their body situation is going to be very different than the one that you postulated, right?
There's no reason to give kids hormones, and there's no reason to decide before a person's frontal lobe is completely fully developed, which doesn't even take place till 25.
Now, once Adam completely lost the biological advantage argument, he tried to segue into children transitioning to argue that when they grew up and became athletes, they wouldn't have those same advantages. However, what Adam unfortunately didn't realize he was about to step into was that children transitioning is a non-starter for Joe Rogan, and then they began to argue about that. And this is where Adam completely lost it.
The research I've seen is that trans kids from a young age, they are incredibly consistent in when they're expressing their gender identity.
But that's a big generalization. You're talking about a lot of human beings.
Now, when Adam realizes that he's giving an anecdote, he then jumps to say, oh, well, I've seen studies that I can't quite name that children are remarkably consistent when they express their gender identity. The problem with that is that's complete nonsense, and in fact, studies show the exact opposite of what Adam is presenting. In fact, the only studies that show that children are very consistent with their gender identity from a young age have very small sample sizes or are taken well into the future, where people are asked to reflect on their past choices who are already transgender. So all those studies really show are that people who have gone through transition as adults, when thinking back, had those same feelings for a long time. They don't show that children are conscious and able to make these choices when they're children. They just show that the people who have made the choices as adults would have liked to have done it as children.
That's a big generalization. You're talking about a lot of human beings.
Yeah, but
that's fits this narrative by saying they're incredibly consistent. But like, if you polled these people, like, what are you talking about? Like, if you,
I mean, that's I don't have the research in front of me that I saw, so I can't like go into the details on it. But like, yeah, it was research that was surveying and tracking like trans kids who declared their identity from a young age. Did it change? The answer was generally no, it really didn't. I have a friend who has a trans kid. Don't know the kid's exact age, but we're in the age range that we're talking about. And he's explained that like, well, my child from a very young age consistently like said, I am a girl. Like, and has never contradicted themselves, never changed their mind.
What I love about this part is that Joe Rogan just asked some basic follow-up questions, and Adam completely abandoned his data, and he moved on to his friend that has a trans kid in the age range that we're talking about. And Adam's like, my friend says that their kid, who is either 7, 8, 9, or maybe 10 at the maximum, because this is the nature of the conversation at this point, has been incredibly consistent.
The humane thing and the thing that he felt was good to do as a parent was to like embrace that choice on his child's part, right? And yeah, that's
embrace that choice, meaning hormonally.
I shouldn't even phrase it as a choice, like embrace that identity.
But it is a choice, right? I mean, if you're choosing to add hormones to a child's body, that's a choice.
It's a choice blockers. It's a choice on the part of the parent. It's not a choice on the part of the child.
And if you needed another red flag that shows that you should not trust Adam Conover when it comes to this topic, this is it. All of a sudden, Adam's like, well, I shouldn't call it a choice because trans people exist. That's just the way they are. It's not a choice. How could I even say it's a choice? That's horrible. And Joe Rogan just knocks that down because clearly it's a choice, and it's a choice on behalf of the parents.
The other thing I was going to say is that I do know also among the trans folks that I know, or the trans people who speak about this that I've heard, so many of them say, I wish I had access. I knew this about myself at a very young age, and I wish to God that I had the ability to receive, these hormones at a young age.
There are people that have gone through transition surgery and said, I wish to God that I never did this. There's a lot of those people too. So if you're looking for anecdotal evidence and you want to be objective, you kind of have to look at both sides of it.
Now, Joe Rogan immediately smacks this point aside as it is in fact an anecdote. And it should be pointed out that just because a child of 7, 8, or 9 has never backtracked on their gender identity, that doesn't mean you should start chemically transitioning them, because they could still backtrack in the future.
Their gender identity, who they feel they really are. I'm all for you doing whatever you want to do when you're an adult, when your mind is formed. But people change their mind. They change their opinion. They change their thoughts. Some will and some won't. And the ones who won't, they always have the option to do something later on in life. But if you do something to hormonally block a child very, very early on, there's no turning back from that.
Remember, we are speaking of a child and children who haven't even hit puberty yet. So the idea that we should allow them to completely alter their lives and sterilize themselves based on their whims and not our adult better judgment is ridiculous.
But you have to address the fact that there are people that have gone through transition surgery and said, I wish to God that I never did this.
I'm very curious, and this is what I'd go consult my friend or my recent interview subject, Brent Tannehill's work on this, to see how many are in each group, right? And which sets of these folks are the outliers.
Now, there's a little bit of a back and forth here about which group there are more of in terms of numbers. And I'm not really a fan of this conversation, but it does lead to my absolute favorite question of this entire segment.
The same way that being gay isn't a choice, yeah.
Okay, but if that's who they are, if they think that they're a girl, why do you have to give them hormones to make them more of a girl?
Because... I'm sorry, can you expand on the question?
It's a simple question. If you say that the child thinks it's a girl, so you're going to give the child hormones... Mm-hmm. If the child thinks it's a girl, let it be a girl. Like, you don't have, why are you adding hormones?
That clip is amazing, and it should be shown on the internet from this day till the end of time. That was such a basic and beautiful question, and Adam's inability to answer is demonstrative of all the problems with the modern day left. You see, the modern left is not prepared to debate a single topic, and when you can't virtue signal your way out of a situation or call the person asking questions or trying to debate you a bigot, they're done. They can't do anything. You see, Joe Rogan with this one question revealed that both of these people purport to be in favor of transgender people and transgender children to a certain extent, but Joe Rogan is the only one with a rational view on transgender children, while Adam has a deeply ideological one.
I feel like if a child thinks they're a girl, let them live as a girl. But you don't have to hormonally engage with their body with chemicals. It just seems crazy. It seems ill-advised. This seems to me to be a leap, and that you're making this leap to confirm your ideology and to confirm that, you know, you're 100% cool with trans people and you're 100% cool, and you're going to recognize this child as trans. But you're doing something. You're doing something to this child's body that you can't turn around. And if this child decides at whatever age we decide that you can make rational decisions to transition as trans, let them fully develop first. Let them be a person.
Rogan is not against what is called a social transition when it comes to young children. Child says that they're a girl. They're very consistent on the fact that they are being a girl, but they're too young for procedures and hormones, so they are allowed to just live as a girl. But if they ever change their mind, it's like, you know, take off the dress and you're totally fine. Conversely, Adam believes that children at the age of 7 can decide to permanently alter their body on a biological level based on his political ideology, despite the numerous negative consequences. Because according to Adam, trans kids are amazingly consistent. And if they're not, you know, that's just an outlier. So what if that kid got sterilized and their body got ruined? Now, the problem for Adam is that he lives in a bubble where everybody thinks that that is okay and that is the correct position. And everybody who doesn't think that is okay, Adam sees as just generally against transgenders as a whole. But people like Joe Rogan, and I put myself in that camp, don't really care what people do with their bodies when they're adults. And they don't really care how so much you decide to raise your child, except when it comes to the point you're doing something that would permanently damage that child. Because the fact is, regardless of how you feel about gender or transgenderism, there is no reason you should ever transition a child. And there are a million reasons that you shouldn't. And I'm going to give you 2 very good reasons you shouldn't do this, whether or not the child decides that later in adulthood they want to backtrack or go forward with their gender transition. Number 1, if your child decides to backtrack, they regret the transition later, you are making the decision to sterilize your child before they hit puberty. That's awful and horrific. Number 2, even if the child as an adult decides that they want to go forward, they don't want to backtrack and have the procedure, especially for male to female transgenders, if you prevent them from going through puberty without getting too graphic for you guys, there actually isn't enough material because it doesn't grow enough to have that procedure to change it to the other organ. So effectively, what Adam's position is that because he wants to see transgender kids normalized in the future, we should allow kids to transition chemically, even though that could have very negative consequences no matter what they decide in the future. Again, as stated in my first video, Adam Ruins Everything is supposed to be a show that puts facts over everything. But here you have Adam Conover taking an absurd position for ideological reasons based on anecdotes. And that's why Adam can't stand up to the smallest amount of scrutiny and follow-up questions. Joe Rogan's a cool guy. I like his show, I like him, but the dude is not a tough interviewer. You shouldn't be stuttering and stammering this much with these basic questions. But Adam's not used to being on his own. He's not used to being questioned like this, especially when he takes an ultra-progressive position. So that's why he fell apart in this part of the interview.
But what evidence do we know? What evidence do we have that this is a powerful, absolute, like intelligent, smart way to handle a child's life over the long term? Like when these kids grow to be 60, as opposed to kids who don't get the hormone shots when they're 6, these people are 15% more happy. There's nothing like that. But yet people are jumping into it because it seems like the thing to do.
I do think that when we're talking about an issue that affects those people, right? The first thing we should do is listen to those people.
Again, the facts and evidence guy who's supposed to go against conventional wisdom and what people feel is true tries appealing to what transgender people feel in order to get out of this argument.
First thing we should do is listen to those people, right?
Listen to the children.
Listen to the children and listen to the adults, right, who said, I used to be that child.
Okay.
You know?
But they are not that child. And, to you say, look, everyone's different. So for them to say, I was that child, that's nonsense. You were a similar child in a similar situation. You were not that child.
No, they're not literally saying they're that child.
But they don't know how that child is feeling.
This is an excellent point by Rogan. Transgender people who say, I was that kid, are not literally that kid and therefore should not be allowed to make judgments about that kid. They may have empathy for that kid, they may be able to see themselves within that kid, but that doesn't mean that they're an authority on that kid's experience.
Look, so all I can do is defer to the experts that I know about this, right? And I'm not an expert on the subject, right? So it's just sort of off the top of my head.
Look, it's fine to say you don't know something and you don't have all the information and then ask to move on to another topic, but Adam doesn't do that. When backed into a corner, he says he doesn't know and he doesn't have the research in front of him. But then he throws out claim after claim based on his leftist talking points. As I pointed out many times, these are not tough questions from Joe Rogan, yet he completely pummeled Adam on this subject. So much so that Adam reverts back to, we should include transgender people in this conversation. We really can't speak on this because we're not transgender, and we should appeal to the humanity of transgender individuals.
When when you and I are talking about this right now, we're speaking pretty hypothetically, right? We're talking about a child that is not in the room that we don't have. We're talking about a fictional child, right? So what we really care about are the actual people, right? And when we talk to the actual trans folks, right, and talk to, say, hey, what do you think? How do you feel? And include them in the conversation, I think we have a different conversation about it,
As I've said in my previous video, nobody is debating the humanity of transgender people. That's an absurd talking point that leftists use to get out of arguments when they don't have the facts on their side. It is a rhetorical trick meant to virtue signal to lefties, and it's meant to shut down the current conversation when it's not going well for you. I think the reason that this podcast and the clips associated with it got so much attention is because Adam and his show present him as this truth teller, somebody who's above the fray. And seeing somebody like Adam who's on a show that's so tightly edited in a long form setting completely fall apart and reveal himself to not be above the fray, to be clearly on the left side of the political spectrum on a lot of these issues, it allows us to view his show with this new context going forward, especially when he's covering political topics. Anyway, that's all I really have for you guys today. Let me know what you think about this portion of the podcast in the comments down below. If you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like, subscribe to our Patreon, PayPal, all that jazz. Till next time.